Magic is fading from the world, and only one thing can save it. In a quiet village at the edge of forgotten woods, a young storyteller named Elara feels this loss deep in her soul. The old tales are growing faint, and with them, the wonder that once lit up her people's lives. Elara believes the legendary world tree holds the key, its ancient stories a source of pure, undiluted magic. So she makes a choice that will change everything. She decides to find the tree, to learn its tales before the last echoes of myth vanish forever. This means leaving the safety of her home and venturing into untamed wilds where few have ever dared to travel. Her quest is a race against time, a gentle story from the dawn of myths, and by the end, you will discover how a single voice can rekindle the light for an entire world. What secrets does the world tree guard, and what will Elara have to become to learn them? I am curious to know, where are you listening from right now, and what is the local time for you? What kind of story would you cross a wilderness to hear? The path into the whispering woods closed behind Elara like a living curtain of green. Ancient trees with gnarled roots seemed to watch her every step, their branches shifting subtly in a wind she could not feel. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the profound silence. Every rustle of leaves sounded like a whisper, and every shadow seemed to stretch toward her. Was this just fear, or was the forest itself testing her resolve? She clutched the worn parchment of her map, its faded lines feeling less like a guide and more like a relic from a simpler time. What if the elders were right? What if she was just a foolish girl chasing echoes, destined to become another cautionary tale whispered by the village fire? Back home, her empty chair at the evening gathering was a silent proclamation. The elders spoke in low, concerned tones, their worry a palpable cloud. But in the corners, among the wide-eyed children, a different kind of magic was stirring. They watched the tree line with new wonder, their games now filled with brave explorers and mythical trees. Elara's absence was not just a loss, it was a spark. Her belief was a seed they had not known they were waiting for. Just as despair began to cloud her vision, a flicker of movement resolved into a small, red squirrel perched on a branch directly in her path. Its eyes held a knowing glimmer, entirely unlike any ordinary creature. It chittered, not with alarm, but with what sounded like pointed advice. Most would have dismissed it, clinging to the solitude of their quest. But Elara, whose heart had always been open to the voices in stories, chose to listen. She offered a piece of her journey bread, a simple act of trust. The squirrel accepted, then became her guide, its chitters translating into an intuitive sense of direction that her map could never provide. The deeper they went, the more the woods revealed their true nature. Strange, shimmering lights, like captive fireflies, danced at the edge of her vision, beckoning her off the path. The air grew thick with a perfume of damp earth and blooming night flowers, a scent that was both enchanting and disorienting. The stakes of her journey were no longer just about forgotten tales. They were about survival in a place that was wondrous and dangerously alive. Following the squirrel's lead, she pushed through a final wall of hanging vines and stepped into a sudden clearing. The air stilled. Before her stood a circle of silver-barked trees, their leaves humming with a soft, resonant energy. It was a sound she knew, a vibration she had felt only in her deepest dreams when the oldest stories came to her. This was not the world tree, but it was a place touched by the same ancient magic. The hum was a call, a promise of secrets, waiting just a little further on. The hum of the silver trees was not just a sound, but a feeling, a resonance that seemed to speak directly to her spirit. As Elara stepped into the grove, the rustling of the leaves began to form patterns, soft and fragmented like whispers from a dream. She closed her eyes, letting the sensations wash over her. Visions flickered in her mind, images of a time when the sky was new and the land was raw. She saw a single, brilliant seed falling through an endless night, a gift from the stars that took root in the heart of the world. This was the first memory of the world tree, a story of creation, so old it had been worn smooth by time, like a stone in a river. It was only a fragment, but it was real, and it filled her with a fierce, burning resolve. The magic was not just a memory, it was a truth waiting to be remembered. But the grove was not a library for the idle. As she absorbed the whispers, a new silence fell around her, a pocket of stillness that felt intensely watchful. The hairs on her arms stood up. She was not alone. Something ancient and patient was observing her from the deep shadows between the trees, judging the intruder in this sacred space. With a trembling hand, Elara pulled her journal from her pack. She would not let these whispers fade. She began to scribble, translating the rustling cadence into words and sketches, her focus so complete she barely breathed. This act, this commitment to preservation, was a declaration. She was not a thief of secrets, but a keeper of lore. The presence made itself known not with a sound, but with a shift in the very air. A figure emerged from the trunk of the largest silver tree, a being woven from dappled light and living bark. Its eyes held the deep, slow patience of the forest itself. You listened to the echoes. It spoke without a voice, its words forming directly in her mind. But do you listen for understanding, or merely for possession? The world tree does not yield its heart to the curious. It offers its stories only to those who would nurture them. Elara met its gaze, her heart pounding. She thought of the children in her village, their games now filled with the hope her quest had given them. "I want to learn," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. "I want to remember, so that others can remember too." The silence that followed was a trial in itself. The forest spirit seemed to weigh the truth in her words, to feel the purity of her intent. Finally, a sense of acceptance, warm like sunlight after a chill, flowed through the grove. "Your heart is a clean vessel, little storyteller," the spirit murmured. The path continues. Follow the water that does not merely flow, but sings. Its song will guide you to the next truth. And with those cryptic words, the being dissolved back into the tree, leaving behind only the gentle hum and a new direction burning in Elara's mind. The singing river awaited. The river's song was a current of pure sound, a flowing tapestry of melody that wound through the mossy stones. Elara knelt at its bank, the water not merely bubbling, but forming distinct, harmonic phrases that shimmered in the air like visible notes. It was beautiful, yet dangerously so. Each lilting tune promised peace, a gentle release from her burdens, if she would only stop and listen without purpose. Her mind felt pulled in a dozen directions, tempted to drift into a waking dream where the quest no longer mattered. She closed her eyes, fighting the enchantment, and focused on the layers beneath the surface charm. There, hidden within the chorus, was a rhythm of deep earth and a melody of sprouting life. She was hearing the story of the first seeds, a time when the world tree's roots first entwined with the heart of the world, bringing a fragile, precious harmony to a land of chaos. The song was a memory of creation itself. To understand it fully, she knew she could not just listen. She had to participate. Taking a steadying breath, Elara began to hum, her voice a quiet, trembling thread, weaving into the river's grand composition. She did not try to overpower it, but to harmonize, to find the spaces where her own spirit could join the ancient magic. As her voice met the water's song, the story deepened. The simple melody of growth revealed a counter melody of quiet sorrow. The harmony the tree had brought was faltering. Its light was dimming, and its deepest stories were falling silent, one by one. The river's song carried a plea, not for a hero with a sword, but for a true storyteller, a keeper who could help its voice be heard again before the final note faded. The music did not end abruptly. It simply softened, its final phrases washing over her like a blessing before the river returned to its ordinary murmur. The last clear note left behind a single, vivid image in her mind, a vision of a steep mountain path bathed in an otherworldly twilight, its peak hidden in mist. Her purpose was renewed, sharpened by a newfound urgency. The world tree was not just waiting to be found, it was waiting to be saved. The Starfall Mountains rose before her like a wall of jagged stone, their peaks piercing a sky the color of faded indigo. Elara's hands, already calloused from her journey, gripped the rough rock as she began her ascent. Each pull of her body upward was a battle against gravity, a slow, arduous dance on a vertical stage. The wind was a constant, howling force, trying to pry her from the cliff face, and the occasional rumble of shifting stone sent fresh waves of fear through her. Her old dread of heights screamed in the back of her mind with every glance down into the dizzying chasm below, but she answered it with a simple, repeating truth. The world tree waits above. She would not let the mountain break her resolve. Halfway up a particularly sheer face, a feeble cry, almost lost in the gale, caught her ear. Tucked into a narrow crevice was a young eagle, one wing bent at an unnatural angle, its dark eyes wide with pain and fear. Elara's own mission screamed at her to hurry. Every second was precious, yet her heart would not let her pass. She secured her ropes and carefully edged toward the creature, speaking in low, soothing tones. With gentle hands, she used a strip of cloth from her tunic to brace the injured wing, offering a few drops of water from her skin. It was a costly delay, a gamble with the fading light, but her compassion was a compass that pointed truer than any map. That single act of kindness rippled through the mountain's spirit. As she resumed her climb, the shrieking winds seemed to lessen around her. The very rock felt more stable under her fingertips. Then, shadows circled above, not threateningly, but as an escort. The parents of the eaglet she had aided now flew beside her, their powerful wings cutting a path through the turbulent air. They did not carry her, but their presence guided her, showing her the safest handholds and ledges invisible from below. Her fate was now woven with theirs, a thread of mutual respect in the grand tapestry of the wild. As twilight began to stain the high peaks, the lead eagle let out a sharp cry and dove toward a section of the cliff that appeared utterly seamless. With a beat of its wings, It seemed to disappear into the solid rock. Trusting the guide her own heart had chosen, Elara followed, finding a cleverly concealed fissure, just wide enough to slip through. It opened into a vast, hidden cavern, its air still and strangely warm. The exhausted eagle settled on a high rock perch, its gaze fixed on the cavern's depths, as if waiting. This was not merely a shelter from the storm, but a gateway. The mountain had offered her its trust, and now it offered its deepest secret. The cavern walls were not mere stone, but a tapestry of light. Countless crystals, each one a captured star, pulsed with a soft, internal glow. Elara reached out, her fingers hesitating just above a small, amber-colored gem. The moment her skin made contact, the cavern vanished. She was standing on a windswept plain, under a sky filled with unfamiliar constellations. A lone figure knelt, pressing a hand to the soil, and from that touch, a sapling of impossible light sprouted. It was the first storyteller, and the vision was not a recording, but a memory she was living. She felt their awe, their profound connection to the nascent world tree, a bond not of mastery, but of shared breath. Stories were not simply told, they were given life through that connection, and they withered when left unheard. The vision shifted as her hand fell away, leaving her breathless in the silent cave. This was a library of souls, but the library was also a labyrinth of emotion. She moved deeper, touching a sapphire crystal, and being flooded with the joyous celebration of a mythic wedding between a river spirit and a mountain king. Then her fingers brushed a shard of smoky quartz, and a wave of desolation crushed her. She saw a vast, silent hall where countless stories lay like fallen leaves, their colors faded, their voices extinguished. It was a vision of a time when fear had made people hide the tales away, and the great tree had grown sickly from the starvation. The emotional whiplash was immense. Each touch was a gamble, a potential descent into sorrow or an ascent into wonder, and the weight of all these forgotten narratives pressed down on her, feeding a deep, gnawing fear. What if she, too, failed them? Her resolve hardened into something fierce and desperate. She would not shy away. With a trembling breath, Elara began a systematic pilgrimage, touching every crystal within her reach. Light and shadow and sound and silence erupted around her in a disorienting cyclone. She witnessed the forging of the first comet, felt the grief of a forest, saying goodbye to its summer spirit, and learned the true name of the wind. It was too much, a flood of lore that threatened to shatter her own sense of self. Her head throbbed and her vision blurred, but she did not stop. Her relentless curiosity was a shield against the fear of loss. She was gathering the scattered pieces of a broken song. With every story absorbed, the central truth became agonizingly clear. The world tree was not ill by chance. Its fading light was a direct consequence of these tales falling into silence. It was not a warrior it needed, but a voice. She had to become more than a seeker. She had to become a vessel, a living library who could carry these stories back into the world. The personal burden was immense, a responsibility that settled on her shoulders like a mantle of stone. The fate of magic itself now depended on her memory, on her ability to give these ancient whispers a home in the hearts of her people. Just as the sensory overload reached its peak, a single crystal, set high in the wall, flared with a pure, steady white light. Unlike the others, it did not pull her into a vision. Instead, it projected a clear, shimmering path of light onto the cavern floor, a luminous trail that snaked through the maze of glowing pillars and ascended a natural staircase she had not seen. The path led to a slender crack of daylight, an exit high on the mountain's face, pointing her unerringly toward the next, and perhaps final, phase of her journey. The cave had given her its gifts and its warnings. Now, the open sky was calling. The sheer cliff face ended in a terrifying emptiness, a chasm so wide and deep, the other side was lost in swirling cloud. Elara stood at the precipice, her heart sinking. No path wound around it, no bridge spanned the abyss. It was an impassable wall of air, a barrier that seemed to mock her entire journey. Just as despair began to tighten its grip, a familiar, sharp cry echoed from above. The young eagle she had mended soared into view, its wings strong and sure, flanked by two majestic adults. They circled her once, then landed on a rocky outcrop nearby, their intelligent eyes fixed on her. The parent eagles dipped their heads, a clear and unmistakable offer. They would carry her across. Trusting them meant surrendering completely. There would be no sturdy rope, no secure handhold, only the grip of her hands on powerful feathered backs, and a faith that felt as fragile as a spider's web. As she carefully settled between the great wings of the lead eagle, her knuckles turned white with the strain of holding on. The world dropped away in a dizzying rush as the eagle launched from the cliff. Wind screamed past her ears, and the vast, open sky yawned beneath her, a void that promised a final end with a single misstep. She squeezed her eyes shut, fighting a wave of vertigo that threatened to unmake her. This was not just a test of her courage, but of her faith in the connections she had forged. She had to believe that the kindness she had given would now become her safety. Opening her eyes, she forced herself to look down. The chasm that had seemed an end from the ground was now a breathtaking vista from the air, a painting of deep shadows and sharp, sunlit ridges. And then, through a break in the clouds, she saw it. A vast valley lay cradled between the mountains, shrouded in a soft, luminous mist. At its very heart, a gentle, pervasive glow emanated from the haze, a light that pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm she felt in her own soul. The world tree was there. It was real, and it was close enough to feel its call. The sight burned away her fear, replacing it with a soaring hope. The eagles descended in a graceful spiral, setting her down with impossible gentleness on a carpet of moss at the very edge of the mist-shrouded valley. As she slid from the eagle's back, her legs trembling not from fear but from awe, she placed a hand on its neck. "I will remember you," she whispered. "Your story will be among the first I tell." The eagle dipped its head once more, then launched back into the sky with its family, their forms vanishing into the sunlit heights. Alone again, Elara turned to face the valley. The mist before her pulsed with that same soft, inviting light, a silent, beckoning call to take the final steps into the heart of all myths. The mist felt cool against her skin, a living veil that shifted and swirled with its own hidden currents. Elara took one step, then another, leaving the solid ground of the mountains behind. The air hummed with a profound, ancient energy, the presence of the world tree so close it was like a second heartbeat in her chest. For a moment, the mist thinned, revealing a breathtaking glimpse of a forest where trees were woven from silver light and flowers bloomed with soft, internal stars. A creature with the body of a stag and antlers of intertwined crystal stepped gracefully from behind a trunk, its eyes holding the wisdom of forgotten ages before it dissolved back into the haze. Each vision was more beautiful than the last, a parade of wonders that tugged at her soul, but the mist was a capricious guide. The very next moment, it would form the comforting image of her village hearth, the familiar faces of the elders beckoning her to return home, to safety. Another time, it showed her a clear, sunlit path that crumbled into nothingness the moment she stepped toward it. Her eyes, she realized, could not be trusted here. This place was testing not her strength, but her discernment. The whispers began as a soft susurrus at the edge of her hearing, growing more distinct as she pressed onward. They were not the gentle hum of the silver grove, but voices layered with doubt and warning. "You are lost," they murmured. "Your memory is flawed. You will fade here, just another story forgotten by the world." The personal risk was no longer just physical, it was existential. To fail was to lose her very self, to become another phantom in this valley of illusions. Fear coiled in her stomach, cold and sharp. She closed her eyes, blocking out the deceptive visuals. She thought of the river's song, of the deep sorrow in its melody. She remembered the weight of the crystal memories, the desperate need of the stories to be heard. That connection, forged through her journey, was a thread of pure truth in the labyrinth of mist. She made a choice. She stopped following the shifting paths with her eyes and instead turned inward, focusing on the gentle, persistent pull in her heart, the same pull that had harmonized with the river and understood the eagle's cry. It was a faint signal at first, a quiet knowing that urged her to turn left where her eyes saw a solid wall of rock, to step forward where a terrifying chasm appeared to yawn. Each step taken on faith made the inner pull stronger, a beacon growing brighter against the psychic noise. The mist seemed to resent this defiance. It thickened into a blinding, pearlescent wall, and the whispers rose to a frantic chorus, screaming of eternal solitude. But Elara held fast to her inner compass, her faith a shield against the despair. She walked with her eyes still closed, guided only by the essence of the tree she had come to know so intimately. And then, as suddenly as it had closed in, the mist parted, the cacophony of whispers ceased. Before her, a clear, straight path of soft moss and clover unfolded, leading into a serene, sun-dappled meadow. The air here was perfectly still and warm, filled with the scent of dew-kissed blossoms. At the meadow's center, a great and silent presence waited, and the entire world seemed to be holding its breath. The meadow was a perfect circle of quiet, a place where time itself seemed to have settled, and at its very heart stood the guardian. It was the same stag-like creature she had glimpsed in the mist, but here, its full presence was overwhelming. Its coat was the deep green of ancient forests, and its crystal antlers caught the light, casting tiny, shimmering rainbows on the grass. It did not move to block her path. It simply was the path, and its dark, knowing eyes held her completely. "You have walked far, little one," a voice said, not in the air, but within the quiet spaces of her own mind. But distance does not grant worth. Why should the heart of all stories open for you? This was not a greeting. It was the first question of a test. The guardian's gaze was a weight on her soul, and she felt it sifting through every memory, every fear, every hope she carried. It presented her not with physical challenges, but with echoes. It showed her a fleeting image of the singing river, then asked, "What is the name of the sorrow carried in its current?" It summoned the memory of the crystal cave's joy, then demanded, "Why does that particular joy matter more than any other?" Elara's mind raced, scrambling through the library of experiences she had gathered. She could recall the facts, the images, the sounds, but the Guardian was asking for something deeper. It was testing her understanding, her sincerity in believing these were more than just old tales. Under that stern, patient gaze, the fear of failure was a cold stone in her stomach. If she gave the wrong answer, if she proved herself just a curious collector, she would be cast out, and the tree would be lost. So she stopped trying to find the right answer and started speaking from the truth in her heart. She did not list the stories, she wove them together. She spoke of the river's song, how its melody of creation was inseparable from the memory of loss held in the smoky quartz crystal. She described the courage of the eagles not as a solitary act, but as a thread in the same tapestry that held the first storyteller's awe. She explained that the joy of the sapphire crystal's mythic wedding mattered because it showed that even in a world of immense power, connection was the greatest magic of all. She was not reciting lore, she was honoring it, showing how each story breathed life into the next. The Guardian listened, its immense head tilted, the sternness in its eyes softened into something akin to grief. "Your heart speaks true," it finally murmured, "but you must understand the stakes. The tree is not merely sleeping, it is fading. Its light dims with every story that is forgotten, with every connection that is broken. It does not need a visitor, it needs a new voice, a storyteller to rekindle its light from within." The role it described was not a title, but a sacred burden. Elara's quest was not to find the tree, but to become a part of it. The fate of all myth now rested on her willingness to give her own voice to the silence. With a slow, deliberate bow of its magnificent head, the Guardian stepped aside. As it moved, the last of the shimmering mist dissolved, not like fog, but like a curtain lifting at the dawn of the world. And there it stood, the world tree. Its trunk was wider than 100 ancient oaks, its bark a tapestry of shifting colors and textures that held the pattern of every story ever told. Its roots sank into the earth with a profound, eternal stillness, and its branches reached into the heavens, not as wood, but as living light, holding constellations of blossoming stars among their leaves. It was silent, magnificent, and waiting for her. The world tree's presence was not a sound or a sight, but a resonance that filled the very air she breathed. Each step across the soft moss felt like a movement toward the center of the universe. Elara reached out, her fingers trembling as they made contact with the trunk. The moment her skin touched the bark, a current of pure memory surged through her, not as a single story, but as 1,000 lives lived at once. She saw the birth of stars in the tree's high branches, felt the deep, slow dreams of mountains in its roots, and heard the first laugh of a stream that had never known a shadow. It was the story of creation, not as a distant myth, but as a living, breathing tapestry where every thread was connected, where the fall of a single leaf was felt by the whole. The tree was not just a keeper of tales, it was the sum of them, and in that breathtaking rush, it acknowledged her. Its leaves shimmered, casting a cascade of light that wrapped around her like a second skin, sharing visions of perfect harmony, a time when every creature and every element spoke the same silent language of belonging. but the sheer scale of it was crushing. How could one person, one small village storyteller, hold even a fraction of this immensity without shattering? The weight of responsibility pressed down, a mountain of fear on her soul. What if she was not enough? What if she failed, and the last light of the world tree went out because her voice was too weak to carry its song? Her knees buckled, not from weakness, but from the profound burden of choice. She could pull her hand away, retreat into the safety of being just a seeker, or she could surrender completely. Elara chose surrender. She slid to the ground, her back against the immense trunk, and closed her eyes. She let go of the fear, the doubt, the need to understand everything at once. She opened her mind not as a collector, but as a vessel, allowing the ancient wisdom to flow into her without resistance, to find its own shape within her spirit. It was an act of ultimate trust, a silent promise to embrace this sacred duty with her whole being. As she meditated, a deeper truth emerged from the flowing visions. The tree's decline was not a sickness or an attack. It was a profound and simple loneliness. Its light was dimming from a lack of listeners, from the slow, quiet starvation of being forgotten. It did not need a savior to fight for it. It needed a voice to speak for it. Her mission was to become that bridge, to carry its stories back into the world, so the tree would never again feel so alone. The emotional stakes were no longer just about saving magic. They were about healing a fundamental rupture in the world's soul, about mending a connection that held all of existence together. A soft, warm light began to pulse from the tree's bark, enveloping her in a gentle radiance that soaked into her skin and bones. In that light, she understood everything. She knew the path home was now clear in her mind, and she knew, with a certainty that felt as deep as the tree's own roots, that her real journey was only just beginning. A profound stillness settled over the meadow as Elara opened her eyes. She looked up at the immense, glowing trunk and made a promise, not with a shout, but with a whisper that carried the weight of her entire being. I will carry your stories back to my people. I will remind them how to listen. The vow was a quiet echo in the sacred space, a bond forged not of magic, but of pure, heartfelt intention. In that moment, the world tree responded. A soft light gathered on a low-hanging branch, coalescing into a single, luminous seed that drifted down into her waiting palm. It pulsed with a gentle warmth, a tiny, tangible piece of the tree's own hope. This was her charge, a symbol of the new beginning she had to nurture. The seed felt impossibly light, yet its significance was a heavy, wonderful responsibility. She had to plant it where hearts were open, a task that suddenly felt more daunting than any mountain she had climbed. The journey home would be the easiest part. The real challenge waited in her village, in the skeptical eyes of the elders and the weary hearts of a people who had learned to live without wonder. Would they see this seed as a miracle or just a strange trinket from a foolish girl's errand? The fear was a cold knot in her stomach, a whisper of the old doubts she thought she had left behind in the whispering woods. But as she cradled the seed, she knew her approach could not be one of forceful argument. She would not demand belief. Instead, she would embody the very essence of the stories she carried, using patience and gentle persuasion to reawaken the magic they had all once known. She would have to show them the connection, not just tell them about it. The tree's final warning echoed in her mind, a clear condition for success or failure. The seed would only grow in soil, nourished by open hearts. Its fate was now directly tied to her ability to inspire her community, to remind them of the joy found in a shared tale under the stars. Failure meant more than a personal disappointment. It meant the last, best hope for the tree's light would wither in her hand. With the seed carefully wrapped and tucked into her pouch, resting safely against her heart, Elara turned to face the path that led home. The forest ahead seemed different now, the shadows less deep, and the sunlight warmer on her skin. The way forward was not a retreat, but the true beginning of her purpose, and every step was lit from within by the gentle glow of the promise she carried. The path home felt like walking through a familiar dream. Elara moved through the mist-shrouded valley and back up the Starfall Mountains, but the landmarks that had once seemed so treacherous now felt like old friends. She saw the wisdom in the twist of a root, heard a new layer of harmony in the wind's song. When she reached the high ledges, the family of eagles greeted her not as a stranger, but as kin, their sharp cries sounding like a welcome. She shared with them the story of the first flight, a tale she had absorbed from the world tree about the courage it takes to trust the air. As she spoke, the eagles seemed to stand a little taller, their pride in their own nature reflected and honored by the ancient myth. In the crystal cavern, she did not linger to touch the memories, for they now lived within her. Instead, she found the forest spirit waiting at the grove of silver trees, its form shimmering with quiet anticipation. "You return changed," it observed, its voice a rustle in her mind. Elara smiled and began to recount the tale of the first storyteller, not as a distant legend, but as a shared memory of how one act of connection can ignite all creation. The spirit listened, and as the last word faded, the silver leaves above them brightened, humming with a renewed, vibrant energy. Her role was becoming clear. She was not just a carrier of stories. She was a spark meant to rekindle the lights she had found along her way. Yet with each successful telling, the quiet anxiety in her heart grew. The seed pulsed warmly against her chest, its glow undeniably brighter after she shared a story, as if fed by the act of connection itself. This was proof her mission had power, but it also raised the stakes to a terrifying height. What if the spark she carried was not enough to light the hearths of her own people? She practiced constantly, speaking the tales to the rustling leaves and the patient stones, refining her words, searching for the precise rhythm and emotion that would make the old magic feel immediate and real. She wove the lessons of the river's sorrow and the mountain's trust into the narratives, turning each story into a map for living with a more open heart. The final stretch through the whispering woods was the greatest test of her newfound voice. The shadows still stretched, and the air still held a watchful silence, but now she met it with stories. She told the woods the tale of the deep-rooted tree that taught the forest how to stand together against the storm. A subtle shift occurred. The menacing whispers softened into something more like curiosity, and the shifting branches seemed to lean in to listen. The alliances she had forged were strengthening with every word, creating a web of understanding that made the wild feel less like an adversary and more like a partner. Then, one evening, she caught the scent of wood smoke on the wind and heard the distant, familiar sound of a village bell. Her steps slowed. The comforting smells and sounds of home now felt like the threshold to her most daunting challenge. The cozy hearth fires and settled lives she was returning to represented a different kind of wilderness, one of routine and forgotten wonder. She clutched the pouch at her chest, feeling the seed's persistent, hopeful glow. It was time to see if the stories that had tamed mountains and enchanted forests could also open the hearts of her own people. The familiar wooden gate of her village felt like the edge of a new wilderness. Children, their faces smudged with dirt from play, were the first to notice her, their eyes widening at the sight of the traveler who had dared the unknown. They clustered around her, a flock of curious sparrows, their small hands reaching to touch her worn cloak. But behind them, the adults watched from their doorways and garden plots, their expressions a mixture of relief and deep skepticism. The village elder, a man named Elara, whose face was a map of long-held worries, stepped forward. His gaze was not unkind, but it was heavy with practicality. "We are glad to see you safe, Elara," he said, his voice calm but firm. "But you must see how your leaving has unsettled us, chasing whispers and old legends. What tangible good has it brought to fill our bellies or mend our fences?" The directness of the question was a wall, and Elara felt the fragile seed in her pouch grow heavier. To argue would be to fail. She saw the doubt in the folded arms of the farmers and the weary glances of the weavers. They did not need a debate. They needed to remember a feeling they had long since buried under the weight of daily survival. That night, as the community gathered around the central fire, she did not speak of the world tree or its fading light. Instead, she sat with the children on the outer edge of the circle and began to tell a simple story. It was the tale of the grateful eagle, a narrative woven with the truth of her own journey, but softened into a fable about a kindness repaid. She described the feel of the wind under the great bird's wings and the breathtaking view of the world from such a height. The children fell utterly silent, their imaginations taking flight. Night after night, this became her quiet ritual. She did not demand an audience from the adults. She simply offered these small, enchanting pieces of her journey as gifts to the young. She told them of the river that sang with two voices, one of joy and one of sorrow, and how both were needed to make the water flow. She described the crystal that held the memory of the first laugh, a sound so pure it made flowers bloom. The children carried these stories home, their questions and their newfound wonder beginning to work a subtle magic on their parents. A mother, tucking her son into bed, found herself trying to hum the melody of the singing river. A father, looking at the distant mountains, no longer saw just a barrier, but a place that might hold noble eagles. The hard shell of indifference was slowly cracking, yet a few staunch skeptics remained, led by the blacksmith, a man who trusted only what his own hands could shape. He called it foolishness, a distraction from real work. He warned that Elara was filling their children's heads with dangerous dreams that would only lead to disappointment. His words were a constant, low threat, a reminder that her fragile progress could be undone in a moment. Then, one clear evening, as she told a story under a canopy of brilliant stars, something shifted. She was recounting the vision of the first storyteller, describing the moment the sapling of light sprouted from the soil. As she spoke of that primal connection, a soft, warm radiance pulsed from the pouch at her chest, a gentle light that washed over the faces of her listeners. The children gasped, and every adult, even the skeptical blacksmith, fell into a stunned silence, their eyes fixed on the undeniable glow emanating from the storyteller's heart. The soft glow from her pouch did not fade with the stars. but lingered in the memory of the villagers like the final note of a beautiful song. Elara knew this was the moment. The next evening, she did not wait at the fringes of the firelight. She stood in the very center of the village square, the place where all paths met, and asked for everyone to gather, young and old. She held the luminous seed aloft, its gentle pulse a silent promise in the twilight. Inspired by its light, she announced she would share the oldest story of all, the tale of the world tree's dawn. A ripple of anticipation, mixed with unease, moved through the crowd as they formed a wide circle around her, their faces a mosaic of hope and hardened doubt. She began to speak, her voice clear and steady, weaving the epic of the star seed, falling through the velvet dark, of the first roots drinking deep from the heart of the world, and of the light that blossomed to weave the very fabric of myth. As the narrative unfolded, something miraculous happened. The seed's soft radiance began to spread, flowing out like liquid warmth across the hard-packed earth of the square. It was not a blinding light, but a gentle emanation of comfort that touched every person present. An elderly woman who had spent years feeling the chill of loneliness felt it thaw in her chest. A farmer, weary from a lifelong rivalry with his neighbor, found himself unconsciously meeting the man's gaze, and for the first time, they shared a nod of simple recognition. The communal bonds, worn thin by years of mere coexistence, were being rewoven with threads of shared wonder, but the light could not erase every shadow. As the tale reached its zenith, the blacksmith stepped forward, his arms crossed. "Words and pretty lights are not proof," he declared, his voice cutting through the enchantment. "My plow is real, my anvil is real. What good is a story if it cannot till a field?" The warmth in the air seemed to stutter. The villagers watched, their newfound connection feeling suddenly fragile. This was the test she had feared, a direct challenge to the very essence of her quest. Elara felt a flash of panic, but then she looked at the seed in her hand, a quiet anchor of truth. She did not argue, she did not raise her voice. Instead, she walked calmly toward the skeptic, her gaze soft and open. "You are right to seek truth," she said. "But some truths are felt, not forged. Would you feel it for yourself?" She extended her hand, offering him the seed. A tense silence gripped the square. The blacksmith stared at the glowing object, his jaw set, his pride warring with a flicker of deep, buried curiosity. With a gruff sound, he reached out, his large, callous fingers gently closing around the small seed. The moment he touched it, his stern expression shattered. His eyes widened, not in shock, but in awe. A wave of profound peace washed over him, followed by a surge of childlike wonder, a feeling he had not known since he was a boy staring at his first starry sky. It was a tangible experience of magic, a silent understanding that bypassed argument and spoke directly to his spirit. The resistance in his shoulders melted away. He looked at Elara, his eyes shimmering, and slowly handed the seed back to her, his simple nod speaking more than any apology ever could. With that single touch, the last wall of opposition crumbled. The village's collective hope, once a scattered and timid thing, solidified into a united, breathing force. The stakes were now higher than ever. This was no longer just Elara's solitary mission. It was their shared destiny. The restoration of their communal spirit had proven the seed's power, and now they all understood that the next step, the planting, would require that same unified heart. As the story circle ended, the people did not disperse to their separate homes. They gathered around Elara, their voices blending in a single question. They agreed to help her plant the seed in a special spot, a place they would choose together, turning their full and hopeful attention toward the sacred ceremony that lay ahead. The heart of the village was not a building, but a small, open circle of earth where generations had gathered for celebration and solace. It was here the entire community assembled as the sun began to dip below the horizon, their collective breath held in a shared, silent hope. Elara knelt, her fingers digging into the cool, dark soil, carving out a small and sacred space. With a final glance at the faces surrounding her, faces now filled with a trust that felt both fragile and immense, she placed the softly pulsing seed into the earth and gently covered it. For one long, agonizing moment, nothing happened. The air grew heavy with the weight of their collective doubt, a palpable fear that perhaps the magic had been a fleeting illusion, that their belief was not enough. The blacksmith's earlier skepticism seemed to echo in the silence. Then, a soft, greenish-gold radiance began to emanate from the soil, a light that did not blind but soothe. A delicate sapling pushed through the earth, its form shimmering with an ethereal light, each tiny leaf a captured star. It grew not with a violent rush, but with a steady, deliberate grace, its slender branches stretching upward as if reaching for the first time toward the vast open sky. A collective sigh of wonder moved through the crowd, a sound of fear giving way to pure, unadulterated awe. Elara rose, her voice clear and strong as it cut through the hushed reverence. She began a simple chant of gratitude, not for the sapling itself, but for the open hearts that had made its life possible. One by one, the villagers joined her, their voices weaving together into a single, harmonious promise to nurture this new life, to protect the stories it represented. In that moment, she was no longer just a storyteller, but a unifier, the living thread that connected their individual hopes into a shared purpose. The stakes of their journey had irrevocably shifted. The sapling's vibrant glow was a new beginning, a symbol of their reclaimed wonder, but its health was now a direct reflection of their communal spirit. Its survival depended entirely on their continued care, on their willingness to keep telling the tales and tending the bonds between them. The responsibility for the future of magic now rested not on one pair of shoulders, but on the entire village. That night, under a blanket of brilliant stars, the sapling glowed with a soft, persistent light that bathed the entire commons in a gentle luminescence. Elara stood watch, her hand resting on its slender trunk, and felt a familiar, gentle pull in her heart, a quiet resonance that traveled across the vast distances. It was a feeling of profound acknowledgement, a silent message from the ancient world tree itself, confirming that their first, crucial step had been taken, and that the long work of healing had truly begun. The new storyteller's first students were the children, their small hands tracing the air as they learned to shape the tale of the singing river. Elara showed them how to listen for the rhythm in the rain and find the melody in a bird's call, using the gentle glow of the sapling as their shared hearth. Soon, adults began to linger at the edges of these lessons, their own memories stirring. A weaver recalled her grandmother's fables, and a farmer found the words to tell of the stubborn goat that taught him patience. The village square, once quiet after sundown, now hummed with the sound of many voices, each story a new thread in the vibrant tapestry of their communal life. Elara watched this revival with a heart full of wonder, yet a quiet anxiety began to shadow her steps. Was she truly a teacher, or was she merely a messenger repeating what she had been told? The weight of being the sole keeper felt immense, and in moments of stillness, she worried her own well of inspiration might one day run dry. She had to find a way to ensure the stories could live beyond her own voice. Her solution was twofold. She began a great book, its pages blank and waiting, inviting every villager to contribute their words and drawings. It was a permanent record, a library of their collective soul. Yet she always emphasized that the truest magic happened not on the page, but in the telling. The warmth of a shared glance, the collective gasp at a story's turn, the way a tale changed slightly with each teller. These were the breaths that kept the narratives alive. The sapling responded to this flourishing of lore. With every story shared under its luminous branches, it grew a little taller, its light spreading a little farther, painting the faces of the listeners in soft, ethereal hues. It was a beautiful, visible sign of their success, but it was also a delicate barometer of their attention. A single week of silence, of hearts turned inward to daily worries, and its light would noticeably dim, a silent, urgent reminder of their shared responsibility. This living bond between story and tree could not be taken for granted. Then, as the autumn leaves began to turn, the first travelers arrived. Drawn by whispers of a village with a tree of light, they came with cautious curiosity, sitting at the edge of the story circle to listen. They carried their own tales of distant fields and foreign winds, and when they offered them to the gathering, the sapling's light brightened, embracing these new narratives into its heart. The stories were no longer just their own, they were becoming a gift for the wider world. The arrival of the first travelers felt like a new kind of season. They came with dust on their boots and a guarded curiosity in their eyes, drawn by rumors of a village that had grown a tree from a star. They sat at the edges of the story circle, listening intently as Elara wove her tales, their own faces reflecting the same awe she had once seen in the children. One evening, an elderly woman from a distant valley stood and offered a story in return, a legend of a desert that wept glass tears under a full moon. As she spoke, the sapling's light seemed to pulse in time with her words, its glow deepening as it absorbed this new, foreign narrative. A network was being born, a web of shared lore, connecting their secluded home to the wider world, and with it, a current of hope began to flow outward. Not everyone welcomed this change. A small but vocal group of villagers, led by the carpenter who prized order above all, voiced their fears over the evening meal. These outsiders bring strange ideas, he argued. They will twist our stories, or worse, they will take the sapling's magic for themselves and leave us with nothing. Our traditions are our own, and we must protect them. The dispute created a subtle tension, a quiet rift between those who saw walls and those who saw bridges. Elara felt this friction like a chill wind. She knew that to close their circle now would be to betray the very essence of the world tree's gift. Her response was not a debate, but an invitation. She proposed a festival of tales, a grand gathering where anyone, from any village or wandering path, would be welcome to share a story. She moved through the community, speaking with those who were hesitant, reminding them that a story does not lose its truth. When it is given away, it multiplies. The first storyteller did not create myths for a single tribe, but for the whole world, she explained, her voice calm but firm. Our strength was never in hiding, but in sharing. Her conviction slowly won over the doubters, one by one, until the entire village was swept up in the preparations, their shared purpose mending the minor fractures. On the day of the festival, the village common was transformed. The air buzzed with a dozen different languages and the scent of foods from faraway places. One after another, people stepped into the circle. A mountain hermit shared a tale of a bear who taught the peaks how to sleep through winter. A sailor from the coast sang a shanty about a lighthouse spirit that guided lost ships home. With each new story, the sapling responded in a way that silenced all remaining doubt. Its leaves, once a uniform silver green, began to bloom in a breathtaking array of colors: deep sapphire, fiery topaz, emerald, and amethyst, each hue representing a different land, a different voice. The diversity of the narratives was not weakening the magic. It was making it more vibrant and resilient than anyone could have dreamed. After the final tale was told, and the visitors began to make their farewells, an old nomadic mapmaker approached Elara. He placed a simple wooden flute into her hands. This was carved from a branch of the Whispering Woods. Long ago, he said softly, it is said its melodies can call to benevolent spirits when the player's heart is pure. It is a key, storyteller, for the next part of your journey. He bowed and melted back into the crowd, leaving Elara holding the slender instrument, its wood still warm from his touch. The festival had been a triumph, a celebration of their new community, but the gift in her hands was a quiet promise that the map of wonder was still unfolding, its next destination waiting just beyond the horizon. The wooden flute felt like a living thing in Elara's hands, its grain warm and humming with a subtle energy. Her first attempts were clumsy, her breath shaky, producing little more than a few warbling notes that hung in the air and then dissolved into nothing. She practiced each day near the glowing sapling, where the air itself seemed to listen. Her initial failures, however, were not without their own strange magic. A note meant to summon the image of a soaring eagle instead produced a shimmering, confused chicken that flapped comically for a moment before vanishing. Another misfired note conjured a rain cloud the size of a melon that promptly drenched her from head to toe. The children who gathered to watch her practice found these mishaps utterly delightful, their laughter ringing through the square, but Elara felt a prickling frustration. The flute was not a simple instrument. It was a partner that demanded respect and skill. She realized this could not be a solitary pursuit. Remembering how the village had healed through shared effort, she sought out those with an ear for music. The weaver who hummed as she worked, the farmer who could whistle any bird's call, even the skeptical blacksmith who had a surprising talent for rhythm, they all joined her near the sapling. Together, they explored the flute's potential, learning that its magic was deeply tied to the storyteller's intent. A note played with joy, painted the air with brilliant, warm colors. The same note, played with haste or distraction, could twist the image into something murky and unclear. Elara began to weave this understanding into her teachings. The tool was powerful, she explained, but the true instrument was the pure heart behind it. A story told to show off could create a beautiful picture, but one told to genuinely connect would make that picture feel real enough to touch. Their persistence slowly transformed their story circles. A melody played softly beneath the tail of the singing river would cause shimmering, liquid notes to dance above their heads. The story of the crystal caverns came alive with constellations of temporary, glittering lights that floated among the listeners. For the youngest children, especially, this was a revelation. They could now see the noble eagle and hear the sorrow in the river's current, the myths weaving themselves directly into their memories through sound and sight. The flute had become a bridge, making the ancient stories immediate and unforgettable. Then, on an evening when the air was particularly still and the sapling's light burned with a steady, serene glow, Elara played a simple, old melody the mapmaker had hummed. She poured into it not just the notes, but all her gratitude for the journey and her hope for the future. As the final note hung in the air, something new occurred. The light from the sapling seemed to gather and coalesce, pulling itself into a slender, luminous form that twirled and danced above the grass. It was a spirit of pure light, silent and graceful, its movements echoing the flute's melody as it wove protective, joyful patterns around the young tree. A profound hush fell over the villagers, not of fear, but of wonder. The music had not just illustrated a story, it had invited a new kind of magic to their hearth, a gentle guardian born from the harmony of their shared songs. The spirit of light introduced herself as Elara, a name that felt like a soft chime in the mind. She was not a guardian of the tree, but a piece of its own joy, a living echo of the world tree's happiest memories given form. Her presence was a gift, a direct answer to the village's harmonious efforts, and her purpose was to help Elara in her great work. From that evening on, Elara became the heart of every story circle. She would dance and shimmer as Elara spoke, her light painting the scenes in the air, and her subtle, chiming sounds underscoring the emotional heart of each tale. A story of bravery was lit with brilliant gold, while a tale of quiet sorrow was softened by her gentle, silvery glow. The narratives were no longer just heard, they were felt, washing over the listeners and leaving them with a deeper, more resonant understanding. This beautiful partnership, however, came with a sobering truth. Elara soon noticed that after a particularly vibrant storytelling session, Elara's light would dim slightly, requiring a period of quiet rest near the sapling to restore her energy. The spirit's very existence was a delicate balance, fueled not by the stories themselves, but by the genuine belief and heartfelt participation of the people listening. Her presence was a direct reflection of their collective enthusiasm, a living mirror of their communal spirit. This created a quiet, constant need for the village to sustain its newfound wonder, a responsibility that could not be ignored. In response, Elara and Elara began to create together. They did not simply retell the old myths, but wove new ones, blending human perspectives with the spirit's ancient understanding. Elara would provide the narrative structure, the human emotions of challenge and triumph, while Elara would infuse it with the deeper, wordless truths of the forest, the mountain, and the stars. The result was a new kind of lore, stories that felt both comfortingly familiar and thrillingly new, showcasing how tradition could grow and innovate without losing its soul. The stakes of their endeavor were made painfully clear one evening when the village was preoccupied with a harvest, and the story circle was smaller and more distracted than usual. Elara's form grew faint, almost transparent. She explained, her voice a whisper on the edge of hearing, that she was a creature of shared narrative. If the storytelling were to ever stop completely, If the hearts of the people closed, she would not sleep. She would simply cease to be, and a vital spark of the world tree's joy would be lost forever. This truth settled over the community, transforming their enjoyment into a profound and urgent responsibility. The magic in their midst was not a resource to be used, but a relationship to be nurtured, and its survival was now inextricably linked to their own daily choices. Inspired by this revelation, and determined to ensure Elora's light would never fade, the village made a collective decision. They would create an annual Storytellers Festival, a grand celebration held under the autumn stars. It would be a time to honor all the tales, old and new, and a sacred promise to future generations that the stories would always have a home, and the spirit of harmony would always have a reason to dance. The village square transformed under a twilight sky, its familiar contours made new by strands of captured starlight and colorful banners painted with scenes from the oldest tales. Neighbors arrived from distant hamlets, their initial hesitation melting away as they were welcomed not as guests, but as fellow storytellers. The air itself shimmered with anticipation, charged with the promise of shared wonder. But this magic did not appear without effort. The festival's creation tested the community's newfound unity. Disagreements flared over the allocation of precious resources, with the carpenter insisting on sturdy benches, while the weavers argued for more vibrant cloth. A quiet tension arose over who would lead the opening ceremony, a moment of honor that several felt was theirs to claim. Elara watched these minor conflicts not with worry, but with a quiet resolve. She moved among the villagers not to command, but to listen. She empowered the baker, known for his patience, to oversee the food preparations. She asked the skeptical blacksmith, whose hands had forged the decorative ironwork, to be the official keeper of the festival flame. By delegating these roles, she turned potential rivalry into shared ownership. Each person given a task felt a personal stake in the event's success, weaving their own thread of pride into the communal tapestry. When the first story was finally told, the result was breathtaking. Music and dance intertwined with narratives from a dozen different lands. A traveler from the northern hills shared a legend of ice spirits who painted the aurora, and as he spoke, Elara swirled above, her light cascading in curtains of emerald and violet. The village sapling responded to this outpouring of joy, its branches stretching upward as if to embrace the sky, its multicolored leaves glowing with an intensity that bathed every face in a warm, gentle radiance. This was more than a celebration. It was a profound declaration. The festival's triumph cemented their cultural revival, proving that their stories could not only sustain their own spirit, but could also become a beacon for others. Its success set a formidable precedent, a high standard of harmony and effort that would need to be met again and again in the years to come. As the final song faded and the visitors began their journeys home, a profound quiet settled over the square. Elara, usually a dancer of constant motion, grew still, her form condensed into a single point of brilliant, serene light that pulsed once, twice, a silent signal of acknowledgement that seemed to travel across the vast distances, connecting their little sapling directly to the heart of the ancient world tree. The stillness of the night was broken by a dream that felt more real than waking. Elara stood once more before the ancient world tree, but its light was different, tinged with a deep, resonant sorrow. Instead of sharing its own stories, it showed her visions of other places, She saw a desert oasis where the tales of the wind had been silenced by fear, and a coastal village where the songs of the sea had been forgotten in the pursuit of trade. In each place, a lonely figure, a potential storyteller, struggled to keep a single, flickering ember of lore alive. They were echoes of who she had once been, and their silent pleas wrapped around her heart. She awoke with a start, the weight of their need a tangible pressure in her chest. Her purpose was not a single destination, but a path with many branches. The joy she had cultivated in her own village was just one garden in a world of many neglected fields. This understanding brought a profound conflict. How could she leave the community that depended on her, the sapling she had nurtured, the spirit who was her partner? The village was her heart, yet the call from afar was a pull on her very soul. The thought of abandoning either felt like a betrayal. Her solution came to her one morning as she watched a young girl named Elara. Elara did not just listen to stories, she absorbed them, her eyes tracking every movement of Elara's light, her small hands already trying to mimic the cadence of a storyteller's rhythm. Elara saw in her not just enthusiasm, but a deep, innate understanding. She approached Elara and her family with a solemn proposition. She would take the girl on as her formal apprentice, sharing not just the tales, but the responsibility of tending the village's magical hearth. This decision was a careful gamble. It ensured the tradition would have a new, capable guardian, making the village's revival resilient and independent of any single person. Yet it also meant preparing to step away, to trust that the seeds she had planted would grow strong without her constant presence. For Elara, it meant accepting that her role was evolving from a stationary guardian into a wandering guide. Elara accepted the charge with a seriousness beyond her years, her small hand resting on the glowing sapling as she made her own vow. Elara began her preparations, the enchanted flute, a comforting weight in her pack, and Elora's gentle light a promise of companionship. The familiar paths of home now felt like a prelude to a far wider, unknown wilderness, and the first journey awaited its first step. The first lesson began at dawn, with the dew still clinging to the sapling's luminous leaves. Elara did not hand Elara a list of stories. Instead, she asked her to sit, close her eyes, and listen. Listen to the rustle of the leaves, the distant call of a waking bird, the hum of the light itself. True storytelling, Elara explained, begins not with speaking, but with hearing the world's quiet, constant narrative. Lyra's brow furrowed in concentration, her small hands clenched in her lap. It was a difficult practice for a girl accustomed to action, but day by day, she learned to quiet her own thoughts and hear the subtle music of the grove. She learned to feel the sapling's responsive pulse, a gentle warmth that flowed through the soil and into her spirit when her attention was true. The enchanted flute was the next, more challenging step. Lyra's initial notes were often sharp or wavering, producing shimmering images that flickered and died. A melody meant to summon a gentle breeze might instead create a tiny, chaotic whirlwind of leaves. Frustration would cloud her face, and she would look to Elara, expecting correction. Instead, Elara would simply smile. My first note conjured a puddle that soaked my own boots, she confessed. The magic does not demand perfection. It asks for sincerity. She encouraged Lyra to play not the notes she was told, but the feelings the stories stirred in her own heart. One evening, As Lyra told the tale of the grateful eagle to a small group of younger children, her voice wavered. The words felt clumsy on her tongue, and she forgot a key detail. The children's attention began to wander. A hot flush of embarrassment crept up her neck, and she fell silent, her gaze dropping to the ground. Elara, watching from the edge of the circle, did not step in to rescue the story. She simply met Lyra's eyes and gave a small, encouraging nod. Lyra took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and remembered the feeling of awe she had felt when she first heard that story. She let that feeling fill her, and when she began again, the words were not memorized, but rediscovered. She even added a small detail of her own, a description of how the sun felt on the eagle's wings. The children leaned in, captivated, and the sapling's light swelled with a soft, approving glow. This was the confirmation they all needed. Lyra was not just repeating tales, she was weaving her own spirit into them, becoming a true storyteller in her own right. Her unique perspective, born from a new generation, was adding new color and life to the ancient lore. Seeing this, a deep and quiet confidence settled within Elara. The future of the village's magic was no longer a hope, but a living, breathing reality taking root before her. With this assurance firm in her heart, Elara's own path became clear. She began to gather her traveling pack, placing the wooden flute carefully inside alongside a blank journal for new stories. Her farewells were not grand, but quiet and heartfelt. She shared a long, silent look with Elara, whose light pulsed with a mixture of sorrow and excitement, a promise to watch over both the apprentice and the teacher. The village she had rebuilt was now a steady beacon, and its light was strong enough to guide her first steps into the wider, waiting world. The village gate felt both familiar and strange as Elara passed through it, her pack holding the gentle weight of her purpose. Lyra stood tall beside the glowing sapling, her small hand raised in a steady farewell, while the hum of the village's daily life continued behind her. This was not an ending, but a widening of the circle. The path ahead was one she would walk alone, guided only by the sorrowful map the world tree had painted in her dreams. Each step away from the comforting sounds of home was a quiet ache, a reminder of the warmth she was leaving behind. The silence of the road was a new kind of wilderness, vast and echoing, where her own doubts seemed louder than any forest whisper. To fill the emptiness, she would take out the wooden flute. Her melodies were not for grand magic now, but for simple companionship. A soft tune might encourage a patch of stubborn wildflowers to bloom, or coax a curious fox from the undergrowth, creating fleeting, silent friendships under the open sky. She practiced the new stories she would need, shaping them for ears that had forgotten how to listen, her voice the only sound for miles. The coastal town she sought was more than just a place of quiet tales. According to the dream, their fear of the old myths had severed their bond with the sea itself. The waters had grown restless and less generous, and the community had fractured, neighbors turning inward with suspicion instead of sharing their burdens. Elara's task was to mend a rupture that was both cultural and deeply practical, where the restoration of story was tied directly to the community's survival. After many days of travel, the air began to change, carrying a sharp, salty tang. Then one evening, she heard it. Woven into the constant sigh of the surf were faint, dissonant melodies, like fragments of old sea shanties remembered all wrong, their harmonies twisted by loneliness and a long-held grief. The lost stories were not gone. They were waiting in the very wind, calling for someone to hear their true rhythm once more. The town of Seabreeze huddled against a gray, listless sea, its salt-weathered houses turned inward, as if braced against a perpetual storm. Elara walked its single muddy street, the silence broken only by the mournful cry of gulls and the sullen slap of waves on a shore littered with bleached driftwood. The air itself felt heavy with a grief so old it had become a part of the landscape. When she spoke to a woman mending a net, offering to share a tale of the ocean's generosity, the woman's eyes hardened. "We have no use for old stories here," she said, her voice sharp as broken shell. "The sea only brings us loss, the memory of a past hardship, a storm that had taken loved ones from the shore, had calcified into a wall that shut out all myth and melody." The community's sorrow had turned their hearts to stone, and they saw Elara not as a bearer of gifts, but as a foolish stranger stirring up painful echoes. She understood that a story told too soon would be a weapon, not a bomb, so she put her flute away and simply listened. She sat with the elders on the creaking docks, not asking for legends, but hearing about the empty fishing nets and the murky water that had once been clear. She learned of their regret, that they had stopped singing the shanties that once guided their boats home, fearing the sea's capricious nature. Her empathy was a quiet offering, a way to show she respected their pain before asking them to believe in wonder again. Slowly, carefully, she began to weave a different kind of narrative. She did not speak of Seabreeze's own wounded history. Instead, she shared a gentle fable from a faraway lake about a water spirit who healed a polluted spring by teaching the people a song of cleansing. She told a tale from the mountains of a hidden spring that returned to a valley only after a community learned to speak its name with gratitude again. These were not their stories, but they were mirrors held up at a safe distance, allowing them to see a reflection of their own predicament without the sharpness of immediate pain. The stakes of this quiet persuasion were written across the blighted shoreline. The sea remained a dull, leaden green, and the fish had grown so scarce that the town's future hung by a thread. An old, half-remembered legend whispered that the ocean's heart grew cold when its stories were forgotten, that the water and the life within it thrived only when connected to the voices on the shore. The ecological decline was a direct symptom of their broken cultural spirit. One chilly evening, as Elara sat on a damp log, humming a soft melody, a small boy named Finn, no older than Lyra, crept from behind a beached skiff. His clothes were worn, but his eyes held a spark the town had long since extinguished in its adults. He shuffled his feet in the wet sand, not looking at her directly, and mumbled a question so quiet it was almost carried away by the wind. He asked if the story about the singing spring was true, and if maybe the big ocean was just lonely. That simple, profound question, born of a child's unburdened heart, was the first crack in the wall of silence, a tiny, hopeful fissure through which a new story might finally flow. The water lapped at the shore with a listless, gray rhythm as Elara gathered a small, hesitant group. She chose a simple story, a gentle fable of a sea spirit who did not command the waves, but soothed them, whose voice could coax life back into waters left barren by grief. As she spoke, her words wove a quiet spell of hope over the worn faces. Then she lifted the wooden flute, her breath giving life to a melody that felt like the first sunrise after a long storm. The notes, soft and clear, drifted over the murky water, and then a subtle shift began. The dull green hue of the sea started to brighten, as if a lantern had been lit in its depths. Tiny, shimmering lights, like submerged stars, began to pulse near the shoreline, bioluminescent creatures drawn by the music's call. A collective gasp, part wonder and part disbelief, rippled through the small crowd. Children pointed, their eyes wide with a magic they had only ever dreamed of, but not every heart was ready to open. A fisherman named Kale, his face etched with the memory of loss, stepped forward, his voice a low growl. "Trickery," he accused, his finger jabbing toward the glowing water. "You use some clever illusion to play on our hopes. Do not mock our hardship with pretty lights." His words hung in the air, a challenge to the fragile wonder taking root. Elara met his gaze, her own expression calm and understanding. She did not argue with him. Instead, she lowered the flute and asked a simple question of the entire group. "What was the sea to you before the sorrow came? What memory does your heart still hold on to?" The question was an invitation, not a demand. After a long silence, an elderly woman named Anya spoke, her voice thin and reedy. She recalled a tale her own grandmother had told, of the Marrow folk who would mend torn nets for a song. Another voice joined in, then another, sharing fragments of half-remembered legends and personal moments of joy upon the water. Elara listened, her head tilted, and then she began to weave these threads together. She took Anya's marrow and Kale's own memory of his first catch, blending them into a new, collective story that honored their past without being trapped by it. As this new narrative took shape, something extraordinary happened. The gentle glow in the water intensified, spreading further out to sea. A silvery flicker of fish, the first seen in seasons, darted through the luminous waves. The story was not just being heard, it was being answered. The connection between their shared voice and the sea's vitality became undeniable, a living truth that deepened the town's investment in this fragile renewal. The visible return of life made the stakes profoundly clear, transforming abstract hope into tangible proof. Heartened by this direct response, the people of Seabreeze made a decision together. They would not let this spark fade. They declared that each night, as the stars emerged, they would gather by the water's edge for a story circle, a ritual to patiently reclaim the myths that were their true inheritance, with Elara there to help guide their voices back to a forgotten song. The night the sea spirit rose from the water began like any other story circle, with the townsfolk sharing their reclaimed memories under a blanket of stars. Then the ocean's surface, now a canvas of gentle, shimmering light, began to swirl. From the heart of the luminescent waves, a form emerged, woven from moonlight and liquid grace. She was the very spirit from their tales, her presence a silent, breathtaking answer to their collective voice. A ripple of awe, mixed with a sharp undercurrent of fear, moved through the crowd. Some stepped back, their old anxieties about the sea's power resurfacing in the face of this living myth, but the spirit's demeanor was one of profound gentleness. She moved not with the fury of a storm, but with the serene rhythm of the tides, her light washing over them in a wave of pure, soothing peace. She confirmed what the returning fish and clearing waters had already hinted, that their dedication to storytelling had mended the ancient bond, healing the ocean's heart by honoring its narrative soul. The environment responded in a visible rush, the water clearing to a crystalline blue, and the shorelines blooming with hardy, salt-tolerant flowers that had not been seen in a generation. Elara watched the mix of wonder and trepidation on the faces around her, and knew this fragile trust needed to become a permanent foundation. She gathered with the town leaders, including the once skeptical Kale, whose hardened expression had finally softened into one of quiet reverence. Together, they devised a plan to weave storytelling into the very fabric of their community, establishing a weekly gathering by the shore that would continue long after her departure. To seal this promise, the sea spirit extended a hand of light, offering a single luminous pearl that pulsed with a soft, internal rhythm. She explained that its glow was a barometer of their communal spirit, shining brightly for as long as they kept their stories alive, and dimming if ever their voices fell into neglect. This beautiful, living symbol made the stakes immediate and personal, a constant reminder that their future prosperity was now inextricably linked to the tales they chose to share. As the spirit dissolved back into the waves, leaving the pearl in the care of young Finn, Elara felt a familiar, gentle pull in her own heart, a call that traveled across the leagues from the ancient world tree. Her work here was complete, a new thread securely woven into the great tapestry. With the coastal town now steadied on its own path of recovery, she turned her thoughts toward home, ready to carry the lessons of the sea back to the heart of the forest. The familiar path home felt softer underfoot, worn smooth by the footsteps of her own people. As Elara crested the final hill, the sight that greeted her stole the breath from her lungs. The village square was no longer just a clearing, but a vibrant heart of color and sound, and at its center stood a tree. The sapling was gone, replaced by a young tree whose branches reached gracefully for the sky, its leaves a shimmering mosaic of silver, blue, and the deep green of the forest. Lyra stood beneath it, not as a tentative student, but as a true storyteller, her voice clear and confident as she wove a tale for a rapt circle of listeners. The joy of her welcome was a warm embrace, a chorus of familiar voices that washed over her, yet a quiet tension began to coil in her chest as she watched the seamless life of the village continue around her. She was home, but a part of her spirit still walked the coastal winds. That evening, she shared her new stories, tales of a grieving sea healed by song and a luminous pearl that measured a community's hope. The villagers listened, their own world expanding with every word, their understanding of the mission deepening. The young tree seemed to drink in these new narratives, its light pulsing with a richer, more complex rhythm. This was the consequence of her journey, a tangible enrichment of their collective soul. Yet, as the days settled into a comfortable rhythm, Elara felt a familiar restlessness. The cozy certainty of home pulled at her, a powerful temptation to simply stay and nurture this one perfect garden. But the memory of other silent places, of storytellers waiting in the dark, was a persistent whisper in her mind. She was caught between two equally powerful callings, the love for her community and a duty to a world still learning to listen. Her decision was not a rejection of one for the other, but a careful weaving of both. She would make the village her anchor, her home for most of the year, guiding Lyra and tending their own luminous tree. But when the seasons turned, she would also become a wanderer again, taking short, purposeful journeys to answer the quietest calls for help. This balance felt right, a way to honor the hearth without extinguishing the spark of discovery. The stakes of this choice were written in the light of the young tree. It was no longer just a symbol for their village, but a beacon whose influence was beginning to ripple outward. Travelers spoke of seeing its gentle glow from distant hills, and other communities, hearing of Seabreeze's renewal, sent messengers to learn their ways. The tree's health was a direct reflection of their ongoing commitment, and its growing influence, a testament to the power of a single story, shared. One quiet afternoon, as Elara rested against the sturdy trunk, Elara the spirit materialized from the dappled light, her form more vibrant and serene than ever before. She did not dance, but settled beside Elara, her voice a chime of pure contentment on the edge of hearing. "The world tree feels the new strength in its roots," she whispered. "Your journeys have carried water to its driest branches. It is stronger now than it has been in many ages, all because you taught the world to listen again." The idea for the book began as a simple whisper between teacher and apprentice, a shared desire to give their collected tales a more permanent home, but the process of writing was far from simple. Elara, with her deep connection to the ancient world tree, felt a pull toward the oldest, most foundational myths. Lyra, shaped by the village's revival, argued passionately for the newer stories born from their own community's struggles and triumphs. Their first disagreement over the table of contents was a quiet storm, a clash not of egos, but of perspectives. Elara saw the book as a sacred archive, while Lyra envisioned it as a living seed, meant to sprout new ideas in every reader. The resolution came not with one yielding to the other, but through a patient compromise. They decided the book would have two hearts, one section for the timeless tales of creation, and another for the contemporary stories of healing, showing how the old roots continually nourish new growth. This creative tension forged a stronger bond between them, proving that preservation and innovation could dance together on the same page. Every story they chose to include was followed by a careful decision about how to tell it. They included detailed notes on each narrative's origin, naming the coastal town where a shanty was reclaimed, or the mountain pass where an eagle's legend was first shared. These annotations were a deliberate act of respect, a way to honor the unique cultures that birthed each tale, and to remind future readers that these were not anonymous fables, but living heirlooms borrowed from specific peoples and places. The weight of this responsibility was immense. A single misinterpretation or a carelessly summarized detail could distort a story's soul and break the trust of the communities who had shared them. The book was becoming more than a collection. It was a covenant of compassionate representation, its pages a testament to the belief that every story deserves to be heard in its own true voice. On the day they wrote the final word, a collective sigh seemed to move through the village. They carried the completed book to the base of the young tree, its cover bound in supple leather, and its pages smelling faintly of ink and pressed flowers. As they placed it gently on a reading stand, carved for the purpose, something miraculous unfolded overhead. The tree, which had always glowed with a steady light, suddenly burst into bloom. Flowers of pure, soft radiance opened on every branch, their petals shimmering with the same silvery luminescence as the leaves. They did not wilt or fall, but remained, a permanent, blossoming crown that filled the air with a gentle, honeyed fragrance. This was not just a sign of approval, it was a symbol of a legacy that would not fade. The book and the tree were now partners, one preserving the stories in ink, the other holding their magic in living light, together ensuring that the tales would guide countless generations yet to come. The annual festival's energy was a palpable hum in the air, a symphony of laughter, music, and shared anticipation that seemed to make the very stars shine brighter. Every soul in the village, and many from beyond, formed a vast, quiet circle around the majestic tree, its trunk now wide as a cottage, and its branches a celestial tapestry of glowing leaves and permanent, softly blooming flowers. Elara stepped into the center of that circle, the eyes of her people upon her, Lyra standing proudly at the tree's base. She did not need to call for silence, for a profound hush had already settled, the kind of quiet that exists only in the presence of something sacred. She began to speak, her voice not loud, but carrying to the very edges of the crowd, weaving the final, culminating story. It was the tale not of the world tree's distant dawn, but of its quiet, steadfast struggle, of its light dimming as the world forgot how to listen, and of the fragile, hopeful spark of a single storyteller's choice to remember. As she spoke of the seeds planting, of the village's renewed belief, and of the journeys that carried that belief across the land, the tree began to respond. Its radiant branches shimmered, and from each glowing leaf, a thin, luminous thread of light spiraled upward, reaching into the velvet darkness of the night sky. These threads did not fade, but connected, one by one, to the distant stars above, weaving a visible, breathtaking web of light that linked the earth to the heavens. In that moment, every person gathered there felt it a profound, resonant unity that transcended words. They felt the ocean's tide in their own blood, the mountain's steadfastness in their bones, and the silent, ancient dreams of the forest in their own hearts. They were not separate from the world, but a vital, conscious part of its great, unfolding story. Elara looked out at their faces, illuminated by the tree and the starlight, and in their awe, she saw the complete picture of her journey. She was not merely a keeper of tales or a teacher of lore. Her true role was that of a weaver, patiently and lovingly connecting one lonely heart to another, one forgotten story to a waiting ear, until the entire tapestry of existence could shimmer with the light of shared understanding once more. The quest that began with a solitary step into the whispering woods had culminated in this single, silent, unified breath, proving that a story, carried on a voice of pure intent, could indeed heal a world. The young tree in the village square now stood as a living library, its luminous branches a testament to a world relearning its own voice. Elara and Lyra worked side by side, their partnership a beautiful dance between ancient wisdom and fresh perspective. The village itself had become a living story, a vibrant center where travelers and locals alike gathered not just to hear tales, but to share their own, adding new threads to an ever-expanding tapestry of myth and harmony. This constant, dynamic exchange ensured the tradition never grew stale, but evolved with each new voice that joined the chorus. Far away, in its secluded valley, the ancient world tree felt this renewed flow of stories like a long-awaited rain after a drought. Its own immense branches, which had held a faint, sorrowful glow for so long, now blazed with a vitality not seen since the earliest days of memory. The gentle quest that began with one storyteller's hope had healed a fundamental connection, mending the silence that had threatened to dim the light of all creation. For Elara, this knowledge brought a profound and quiet peace. Her journey had never been about personal glory, but about sowing seeds of wonder in the hearts of her people, and she now watched as those seeds grew into a forest of shared belief that would shelter generations to come. The spirit Elara, a constant, joyful presence in the dappled light beneath the village tree, would sometimes pulse with a particular brightness, her silent dances hinting at uncharted paths and unwritten tales. Her light was a promise that the world still held countless stories waiting to be discovered, and that the gentle work of story keeping was a journey without end, always ready for those with the courage to listen.